You know, one of the most interesting parts about CDL playoffs has actually kind of been the run that the Royal Ravens have been on throughout the losers bracket. And to mine, as well as many others' surprise, this team has managed to make it into the top four heading into Champs Weekend. And again, I say to my surprise, mostly because this team has looked good, right? They have looked good, or at least better, coming into playoffs, but really kind of from every perspective, there were a lot of people that kind of gave their opinions on who could be the dark horse, who could be the team to make the losers bracket run, and the Ravens were not often on that list. So again, kind of coming into this event, we talked about the London home series. Consider the fact that they are one S&D round away from making it to the grand finals, right? They lose a very, very close series versus the Paris Legion. They were in a position to close it out. They go to a game 5, round 11 on Gun Runner, and Paris manages to take it, which kind of set up for a grudge match here at playoffs as well. Again, one round away from calling them a second place team. Even before that event at the New York home series. Granted, they go out a little bit early. I believe they finished top 6, but they lose to both of the teams that ultimately were in the grand finals, in the Subliners and the Chicago Huntsmen. So London, like I said, they looked pretty good coming into the event, but it was hard to realize exactly where this team was because, granted, again, at the New York home series, they lose to the two teams that are in the final. How much do you take away from that, though, right? Which team wouldn't have lost if they would have faced off against both of those rosters? What would have been London's ceiling if they would have won that series? What would London have looked if they made it to the grand finals? Would have been another Paris situation where they get 3-0'd, right? There's a lot of things to be keeping in mind, but you have to realize that kind of going back to what we've seen from London so far here at the playoffs, they're on a good run, right? I already talked about them. They're kind of grudge match, the Battle of Europe versus the Paris Legion. They managed to take them down in a 3-1 to kind of start off their losers bracket after dropping to the Toronto Ultra on the upper side 3-1. After that series victory versus the Legion, they face off against the Subliners. That game goes down to a game 5. They showed some really good resilience coming back in that game 4. I want to say it was on Ramaz. I could be wrong, but I think everybody was under the assumption Ravens are done here, right? We're coming into a hard point. Ravens have looked good at points throughout HP, throughout the entirety of the season, but this is the Subliners, right? This was my dark horse. This was a lot of other people's kind of major talking point that this team could be the roster that surprises and maybe starts to bridge the gap coming into the top 4. However, that was not the case. Ravens managed to win the hard point, and they close out the search and destroy in dominant fashion. Then they face off against the Toronto Ultra, right? A major rematch. Again, they lost to this team most recently in the winners bracket. It is a rematch earlier on in the tournament, and they managed to take out a very hot Ultra lineup. Granted, Ultra were off a loss versus the Dallas Empire, but the streak that they were on, which was up to like 6 or 7 series in a row, they had taken down all the top dogs, Empire included, and now they managed to lose to them, and a squad like the Ravens manages to kind of rush on through and take down a hot team, which was very impressive. So, like I said, it is undoubtedly the fact that the Ravens are on a wonderful run up to this point, but the big question is, heading into the top 4, heading into Champs Weekend, can they continue the run? Because it's been great, but can they continue it? And I'll be honest with you, as time continues to go by, my worry only grows stronger for the Ravens. Now, if London could have faced off, because they're going to face off against the Chicago Huntsmen coming in at Champs Weekend here on Saturday. If London could have faced off against the Huntsmen later that day, or even tomorrow, if we're talking about after kind of post the Chicago versus OGLA series, I like their chances a lot more. I think they have a higher likelihood of coming away with that series. But for me, London's biggest enemy is the week break that these teams have to reset, right? The number one reason why losers bracket teams make a run, especially here at Champs, is because of momentum, right? You're off of the win. The opposing team normally is off of a loss. One team is clicking. One team has kind of figured out how to get things rolling, what is working, what player is going off. Meanwhile, the other team is trying to figure out what went wrong. How do we fix how we just lost, right? That is ultimately what the major point of reference is for teams that are making a losers bracket run. And there's proof of this, right? It's not as if there has been one moment throughout COD history where a COD Champs losers bracket run has happened. No, it's actually happened in all 7 previous COD Champs. Some team has made it from at least losers round 2 to at least losers semis, right? We've always seen a losers bracket run in COD history, COD champs history, and the same is being said possibly here for the Ravens as well. So my worry for London is that one of the biggest assets that they have in being a losers bracket team and of being on a run like this is that they now have previously something that is a major asset for them that is no longer not nearly as effective, right? That ability of being on a momentum swing, that ability to kind of have that 1-2 punch, right? Of being a top caliber team, or at least being in the form of a top caliber team and catching the other roster off guard. And again, if you're the Chicago Huntsmen facing off against the Royal Ravens, this benefits you, right? The longer this series takes, the more that it favors you, because historically, you have been the more consistent team. Historically, you have beaten the Ravens in the 3 times that you've played. And now you get a chance to let the Ravens cool off. So like I said, you're kind of getting into this same atmosphere that you have been previously, where it's kind of like these home series where you play one match a day, you're prepared, you're coming into a day fresh, right? If at least you're the Huntsman, you're not gassed after you've had what has been a very difficult Game 5, Round 11 versus OGLA. And like I said, they get a break. Right, they get a break after a grueling series. They get a chance to figure out what the Ravens have been up to. Right, I would be concerned for Chicago if they had to play the Ravens right after that series versus Optic. But that is no longer the case. Right, the Huntsmen get the chance to figure out what has given London this major spark, right? How has Shawnee and Zero become these major impact players for the Ravens so far throughout playoffs and now leading into champs, right? How has London managed to win respawns, hardpoint specifically, despite getting outslayed? How is their search and destroy looking so great, right? This is time that the Chicago Huntsmen wouldn't have previously had. And like I said, you faced off against this team 3 times. Every single time you beat them 3-1. And now you get that same atmosphere, you get that same awareness and that same time to prepare for this roster. Again, if you're the Ravens, what you're relying on is this sneaky surprise, right? You're relying on this big option, or rather this big opportunity to take down a team that is trying to figure you out. And when we talk about this series specifically, I worry for the Ravens, not just because of this series specifically versus the Huntsmen, but just in general. My worry for them throughout the entirety of the tournament, one of the primary reasons why I didn't have the Ravens making it to Champs Weekend has been because of one primary cause, and that has been their issue in domination. And so far throughout playoffs and leading into Champs Weekend, domination hasn't looked much better, right there. I believe they're 1-3 in series up to this point. And that's not going to get it done against the Chicago Huntsmen. Now, the reason for that is because the Chicago Huntsmen are the best Game 1 hardpoint and the best Game 2 search and destroy team in the entire CDL. So, if you're the Ravens, you're not looking forward to that Game 3. You're often not winning that Game 3. You're the 11th best team in the CDL in domination. And now I believe you have to rely on that mode in order to get over the Huntsmen here. But again, I have to bring this up. I'm happy with what we've seen from London, and I think they have a chance to win this series. But if we're talking about a losers bracket run that can continue here at Champs Weekend, I don't like the chances. I don't. And the big storyline so far for London throughout the entirety of the season, right? They're good against the teams they're supposed to be, but they're bad against the teams that are subjectively considered better than them, right? Against the Huntsmen, Empire, and FaZe, their record 0-9 in the regular season. And you know who the 3 teams that are left here at Champs Weekend? Empire, Huntsmen, and FaZe. All of the teams that have beat them, right? They have an 0-9 record against are now the rosters that they have to face off against coming here into Champs. And so, like I said, the first lineup they're going to have is against the Chicago Huntsmen. And I feel like it's not going to be an easy one. And if you look back at their history versus the Huntsmen specifically, they have won all 3 modes, but at different times throughout their series history. They've won a domination on St. Petro. They've won a search and destroy on Arkalov Peak. They've won a hardpoint on Gunrunner. And if you've watched the Ravens historically, those are maps that they usually do win. So I think that there is a chance, but my worry for the Ravens and my worry for them here at Champs Weekend is for a number of different things, right? It's their series history versus the Huntsmen. It's their series history versus FaZe versus the Empire, if they can even make it past Chicago. And not only that, their one major element, their one main priority of being a losers bracket team is now not nearly as effective as it has been for prior teams. Right? If we're looking at prior champs years, the teams they continue to kind of fire on forward. Right? If you hear Study, if you hear Nameless, if you hear Merc talk about their run back in 2014 with Team Envy at COD Champs back in Ghost, it was literally one series at a time, going down to the wire, feeding off of momentum, and that carried them into the grand finals. And for the Ravens, you have a blocking point, right? You kind of have this moment where you have to yield, and we'll see whether or not they can come away with it. But again, I like what we've seen so far from the London Royal Ravens. Very impressed with this team, especially coming into next year. But I believe that this series versus the Chicago Huntsmen to kind of start off Champs Weekend will in fact be their final series of the year.